Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And it's the beginning of a new week. I hope that you're all revved up this Monday to begin a new week. I have had an interesting, busy weekend with lots of good things getting done. And then yesterday was just kind of a rest and recuperate sort of day for me. But then we've had a major shift in the weather here. It's now definitely fall, and I usually find at least one recuperation day necessary when we have a major change in the weather. But I'm quite enjoying the fall weather. I hope you are too. As you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you're watching on. For the most part, they will show up here in my chat room. And my stated subject for today is the Princess of Swords. And it's not really the tarot card. Oh, and hello to Christine in the chat room. It's good to see you. That I want to talk about, although I will show you the Princess of Swords from the Hecate Tarot. And you can see the picture. Of course, she takes different forms in different tarot decks, but usually female, sometimes male. Hello to Janet Winston in the chat room. It's good to see you. But it's not really the tarot card itself that I want to speak to as much as what its meaning is and how this applies elsewhere in the world. I'm also dressed in orange today for the sacral chakra, which is the chakra associated with creativity and self expression, and also things like sexuality and passion of all kinds, which ties into the meaning of this card in a kind of backwards sort of way. And these two things came together totally unintentionally, but they do reflect on each other. So, what is the meaning of the Princess of Swords, and what is its relevance? And again, I'm talking as I've been doing for some time now in terms of leadership, in terms of understanding how to effectively do things, whether we're leading in our own lives or leading an organization. What does the Princess of Swords have to do with that? And the Princess of Swords has to do with regulated communication. What do I mean by that? When you draw the Princess of Swords, or at least when I draw the Princess of Swords, what I understand it to be saying is that in the situation, the person must be very careful with their communications. They must think about them and use them in a conscious way. So it's conscious communication. This is a vitally important skill in leadership. And we will be probably going over that from several points of view during this half hour, although we will also probably segue into other subject matter as we go that has relations or not, depending on what people want to talk about. What it has to do with the sacral chakra is the sacral chakra. It's all about passion and creativity and communication in those ways, generally speaking, without regulation. And these two things are both very important to someone who wants to be in a leadership position, even if it's only leading their own life. The first one is to be passionate about what you're doing, to be creative, to be open to the guidance of spirit, the guidance of your higher self in how you are advancing these things that you're working on, and to use your passion to move yourself forward, but also um, to know when to do that and how to do that, not just to do it without thinking. And hello to Mary Hawk in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. With the Princess of Swords, when it comes up in a reading, to me, it often means that the person needs to make certain that necessary things get said in their communications and that they're said in a good way. Sometimes also it means certain things need not to be said. And of course, the person has to be able to make the judgment between these things. In leadership positions, this can be a very important thing. Um, the most obvious example, and I guess I'll give an example. I have long ago adopted the attitude of waiting ideally about 24 hours before answering important emails, particularly if I find them in any way um, emotional, so that I have time to think about it, time to experience whatever emotions may be there, and come back to it in a rational manner to make the right response. And I highly recommend this if you're in a position of leadership. It's very easy to receive an inflammatory email and make an inflammatory response. It's almost never, in my opinion, the right thing to do. So taking time to think about it before you make your response is very important, in my opinion. Now, different people might need longer or shorter periods of time to think about it. I find 24 hours to work for me. And when it's time to make that response, now, sometimes the right response will be an inflammatory response. I'm not saying that never happens, but make sure that it's actually called for and is going to produce the result that you want. Because being in a leadership position is all about results. It's not about expressing yourself to the world. That's what everyday life is about. And yes, in a position of leadership, you can express yourself to the world, but that's not what you're mostly there for. You're mostly there to help the people in the organizations that you're working with, to help the people in the community that you're working with, not just to um, express your own feelings all the time. Sometimes it's better not to express your feelings at all in certain situations, but rather look to what is the most constructive thing to do, even if um, even if you have to grit your teeth while you do it. And sometimes that will happen. But, sometimes you may have to work with that person you really don't like in order to have a positive outcome in the situations that you're working on, or at least ignore that person you don't really like. Choosing to go to war with them simply because you don't like them is usually not a good idea. Now, I always say usually, or I try to always say usually, because there are always exceptions. And blanket statements generally are not the best way to go. But generally, when you're in a position of leadership, you need to be thinking of what you're leading, not just of yourself. And to me, in a lot of ways, that's what the Princess of Swords represents. Thinking about the outcome of that communication and how you want to communicate. And, one of the things I so often have heard over these many years in this community are how many people love spirited debate. I'm personally of the point of view we've had quite enough spirited debate. Thank you. And we need to leave spirited debate behind in favor of civil conversations. We've done it a lot better if we'd had a few more of those. Um, because so often that spirited debate was just code words for tearing each other's throats out. Um, I don't think that's ever really a good thing to do in a position of leadership. And hello to Steve in the chat room. It's good to see you, Steve. Now, of course, just because you're in a position of leadership, even if it's leading your own life, or if you're leading an organization or what have you, doesn't change the fact that you're human. So, of course, you're going to have moments when things will make you very angry. And you may not be able to wait 24 hours before you say something. You just need to be aware that whatever you say will have an effect, whether it's in your private life or in your public life. And sometimes we can judge what that effect is going to be, and sometimes we really can't. Um, but always we can consider the matter and ask ourselves what we think is likely. I certainly have had moments when I was not as diplomatic as I might be, which of course is the diplomatic way of saying I've had my moments when I was quite angry about things. And as a human, that's going to happen. Generally speaking, I've tried to keep it out of things that I do in a leadership position. And I think that it is important for us to heed that message of the Princess of Swords when we're in a leadership position and think about what our communication is going to do. Um, I can think of at least one situation where I really should have remained silent and let things take their course, but emotionally I simply couldn't do it. Um, and move things in certainly a forward manner, but not really the manner I had intended. But this is something that's going to happen too. So, another part of this conversation is you also have to remember you're human. And if you do make a mistake in how you communicate a certain thing, in how you handle a certain relationship, or what have you have to be prepared to forgive yourself and go on to try to do better in the future. Obsessing over it isn't going to help matters either. I look back at some of the conflicts. I've talked about the years of witch wars that we dealt with. Some of those were started from exactly this kind of situation, where people expressed themselves without really considering what the outcome was going to be and created a long lasting enmity. That isn't necessarily what you really want to do. Now, of course, there may be times it is. There may be times when someone has done something or represents something that you really feel you should have a lasting enmity with. I still think it's better to pursue it in a conscious manner rather than just flying off of the handle. But, people are people, and we're going to do things as we do them. Coming back from the Princess of Swords to the sacral chakra. The sacral chakra, again, is all about expression. And today's conversation, I suppose, is about expression. Tomorrow, I'll be dressed in the colors of the solar chakra because I've kind of lined out this week's wardrobe. And I'll be talking um, about things that deal a little bit more with that. And perhaps a little bit about the Prince of Swords cup, or card rather. The Prince of Swords card in relation to the solar chakra. But the ruler, at least in the system that I follow, of the sacral chakra is Mars. Mars is the planet of passion, the planet of activity, the planet of, at certain levels, manifestation, the planet of action. But if you look at how it's interpreted by many people, it's interpreted as aggression, it's interpreted as anger and warfare, which are not inherently the major attributes of Mars. But for many people, they become the major attributes. And that's part and parcel of what we're talking about today. When that passion and expression are done without thought, they can come off as aggression. And maybe they'll be aggression. And these two things that I'm referencing, the Princess of Swords and the sacral chakra itself, are opposites in this sense, um, of uncontrolled expression of passion and controlled expression. And I personally have always been very big on that issue of control, probably too big. Um, but I was raised that way. I was raised with the idea of diplomacy. I was raised with the idea of be careful what you say because of its potential outcome. I've spoken occasionally about the fact that my father was a paranoid schizophrenic. which, among other things, meant one had to be very careful in communication with him because what you said and what he heard might not be anything near the same thing. And that, together with my mother's political training, has a lot to do with why I'm a great believer in controlled communication, and as I say, sometimes too much. Finding the balance between these things um, is very important. And I think that we're going to take a moment to hear from our sponsor and then probably talk a little bit more about balance in this situation and why that too is important. I'm just going to take a moment and call up our sponsor. And thank you to Equinox Learning Hub, our sponsor. And so I was saying, learning how to balance these things is also very important because, you don't want to stifle your self-expression. You don't want to stifle your emotions, but you do want to consider the effect that they have in your leadership activities. You're not going to get anywhere in leadership without passion. You must feel strongly about what you're doing in order to do any good with it at all. Um, but you must also consider your communications, and finding how to do this for some people can be very difficult. Um, Maybe in your daily life you are too controlled in your communications and need to learn to express your passion more. Maybe in your daily life you are totally uncontrolled in your communications and need to learn to consider the effects more. But in any case, both of these things are very important in moving forward. And hello to two neurons in the chat room. It's good to see you, two neurons. There are so many situations that I could talk about looking back over the 45 years of my career as a pagan leader, both where I watched people's communications work beautifully to build situations, and also where they just knocked things down. And I would like to say that in the second case, it was because those people were not considering their communications. And sometimes that was true. But, I have to go back to that subject of witch wars again. And that very often, those people who use their passion to knock things down were doing it quite intentionally. And one of the things that I would say to you, if you are studying leadership, is don't let yourself be brought into that kind of situation if you can avoid it. One of the things I've talked about many times is that technique that you see used quite often, where a less well-known person will try to get a better-known person into a public argument. And they'll do this for several reasons. The biggest one is to try to get the the argument decided through public opinion when it's really a private matter. The second one is because it makes them look equal to the better known person to have this conversation as if they were both on the same level when they're usually not. I've seen a lot of people build themselves up through this technique. Knowing how not to get involved in that kind of thing is a very valuable skill. And when someone is attacking you, it's very hard not to respond, but it's usually best. Um, Particularly when you are the well-known person and they're just trying to increase their own standing by your response. These are things that you learn through time. There are all kinds of techniques people have used um, on the field of witch wars that you wouldn't initially think of. Because you look at these things and um, you think you're watching an actual argument, not a political strategy. But they are usually political strategies. This is why a book like The Witch Wars Defense Manual is very helpful, or the soon-to-be published Witch Wars Defense Manual Volume 2, because it spoke about many of those things. And it's not only in our community. If we look at the wider culture wars that we've been dealing with for many years now, they follow the same rules. If you look at most any business situation, you'll see people following these same rules. So although those books address this within the context of the pagan community, it's not just relevant there. I look back again on the 45 years of my career, and there are times when I ask myself, would I be better off if I had spent those years in some other profession? Um, and it depends what you consider better off. Financially, certainly. But overall, I'm quite happy with the adventures I have had and even with where I find myself. But I have to say also that any other route I would have taken, I think I would ultimately have faced many of the same challenges, many of the same battles, because they're really human nature. So when I talk about things like pagan leadership, it's not just pagan. It's things that you're going to find in life in general. And I think that my core advice when it comes to conflict is avoid it if you can and pursue it seriously if you cannot. One of the things about the witch wars is, for all that they were deeply political, the people often weren't very serious about what they were doing. They were playing games in a lot of cases. Very disastrous, very damaging games for the wider community, um, but largely just ego-tripping games. My advice is if you must get caught in a conflict, for heaven's sake, don't do that. Treat it as a serious conflict, because no matter how serious the person starting it is, the outcome can still be very serious. When we're talking about reputational warfare, which is basically what witch wars are about, um, they have long-term effects on the people involved, on the community around them, and they're very rarely good effects. There are always better ways to deal with these things. But sometimes you just have to deal with them because that better way may not be possible in that situation. Which is why, again, I recommend the Witch Wars Defense Manuals as a way of getting a better handle on this. And the Princess of Swords is all about getting a handle on what you're dealing with, understanding what you're communicating about, and insofar as possible, the effect of that communication. I will tell you that very often what you need to consider with communications in leadership situations is not only what positive effect they may create, but avoiding negative effects that they may intentionally or unintentionally create that you may find yourself dealing with later. because the argument at hand, or the situation at hand, or whatever it is you're dealing with, isn't necessarily going to be the end of things. If you're going to be around for many years, you'll be dealing with these people again. Um, and how you handle it now may determine what is possible tomorrow. So, my advice is always take a reasoned approach, always take a sensible approach, and wherever possible, take the more peacemaking approach, because it's rare that you're going to benefit from conflict. Now, there may be times, and again, blanket statements are also not a good idea. Um, I am a great believer in the idea that all publicity is good publicity, with a few obvious exceptions. But generally speaking, um, publicity is always potentially good. But sometimes it's also harder to get that good out of it than simply avoiding it in the first place. So you have to look at your individual situation and make a reasoned response. And I'm going to take a moment for our second sponsor today. And that sponsor is me. Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Reverend Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Reverend Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours. And Reverend Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. The next one will be Friday the 13th at 7 p.m. I'll be talking more about it, and I will have some very interesting things for you in that auction. And I'm looking at focusing a lot more on interesting metaphysical items for people. Currently, we have a lot of books, we have tarot cards, we have oracle cards, but we're also looking at artworks and items such as magic wands, um, tarot and trinket boxes, other things that are useful to the magical person. So watch for that next auction and the ones that come after, and you may find some very good things at some very good prices. And with that, I see we've come to the end of our half hour, and I'm just going to say again, when it comes to the Princess of Swords, it really is about considering the effects of your communication. I spoke last week about choosing your battles. This is perhaps when you can't choose the battle, but you can choose your response. You want to choose the most practical one, the one that's going to have the best outcome. Won't always be the same response, but that is today's message, and I hope you find it helpful. With that, let us close with our prayer as we always do, and I'll be back again tomorrow. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we rejoice in this walk we walk together. We ask you to help us to consider always the effect of our words and our actions on other people and on the world as a whole, and help us to make the right decisions about how to pursue these things. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do in our lives. Knowing you are always with us, still from respect, we thank you for your presence, and may you be blessed now and